Got a great panel coming up now on landscape resilience. So let me turn it over to Patrick.
Okay, another big panel. So we're going to start with John Battles, our distinguished professor at Berkeley, co-chair of our science advisory panel, who's really played a leading role in working with us and key stakeholders in developing the overall landscape resilience strategy. And then we're really going to go rapid fire because we've got a big panel here, just some really brief remarks from each of the rest of the team here to round out the strategy so we get the full flavor of it. So take it away, John.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. All right, so the 10-year landscape resilience strategy really has three main purposes: reduce wildfire hazard, improve the health of our forests and shrublands, and then promote long-term beneficial fire. And clearly that first one, reduce wildfire hazards to our communities and landscapes, is the priority. And as Chief Berlant already said, it's a layered approach with multiple layers of interventions and defenses. And the landscape resilience strategy's goal here is to basically lower the intensity of the wildfires and lower the frequency of wildfires and engage with our community defenses going forward. All right, we also have three main sort of core concepts that I'll highlight as we go forward here. So one of the key things, and we're talking about our forested areas mainly in Northern California and Sierra Nevada, is that we have to do fuel reduction treatments that, again, reduce that wildfire severity, reduces the intensity. So we're in, and one of the things that the task force did, it has a modeling study that looked at what if we really take about the same effort, and this is this graph here, which with acres treated on the x-axis and the amount of wildfire hazard reduction on the y for a 10-year program. And what would that look like if you really did sort of treat the highest priority areas first, the high and very high hazard fuels? And then what if you relaxed that and added more acres as you expanded it out to be more inclusive of sort of lower risk habitats? And what you see is a really big gain, a really sort of big gain in treatment when you really focus on the worst first. And you add more, and it really is diminishing returns. So again, it gets back to this strategic investment. And this modeling was not sort of super crazy. It didn't hit every high hazard area. What it did is it found the locations in each section of the state and treated those proportionally. So it's not entirely crazy, and it gives you hope that you can get a lot of bang for your buck. The flip side, and you've already heard about this, is that we have to reduce the frequency. And this is particularly important in Southern California. And Jeff Hayes will be talking about this more, who's on our panel. But I just want to point out that one of the ways you do that is you reduce ignition probabilities. And that lowers the chance of getting another fire. And you treat along the roadways. And so this is, again, another modeling strategy really led by the Forest Service, where if they can go and do treatment, reduce ignitions along roadways in and near their national forests, they modeled an incredible benefit over 10 years where you reduce the frequency of a large fire from one per every 2 years. And that if you go and sort of look at what the avoided cost from, again, U.S. Forest Service analyses, you can get like $1.6 billion in avoided structure loss. So there's really a good return on investment by trying to reduce that probability of ignitions. We also have to think about restoring the health of both our forests and shrublands. Again, when we think about the nice thing about the forest in the Northern California region is that wildfire risk and overdense forests line up together. So the same strategy of treating the worst first in terms of forest health has this huge sort of advantage in terms of reducing the risk of this forest to just drought losses and competition losses. As you'll hear from Brian Kittler from the American Forest CAL FIRE study today, we were really at a tipping point in terms of our forest health, and part of this huge advance, 80% increase in sort of improvement in forest health, is due to the fact if we do nothing, it's going to get worse fast. And so we really have to intervene right now. And again, the same idea, if you expand it out to more forest going forward, there's really a diminishing return going forward. Again, this emphasis on treating the high priority areas and being strategic about what you do. It's really important because we do have limited resources. As we do these together, we do them both in our forested systems. When we reduce the fire intensity, we really have an opening to increase the use of beneficial fire. This picture on the left is from Scott Stevens and his work at Blodgett, where we have been maintaining wildfires prescribed fires for over 20 years. And this is a maintenance burn, and you can see how well it just goes in. It really a lot easier, a lot lower risk, and very effective. And again, in Southern California, kind of the same strategy where you're in those sky forests, where you got to get them to the point where you can introduce fire and keep it lower severity. And again, you'll hear more about this from Lenya Quinn-Davison on the panel of how we make this transition. The other part is that it's a little bit trickier to think about, like we have a pretty good playbook for how we go and improve forest health. When we come to think about shrublands, how do we improve the health of these shrublands? And it's a little bit tricky to think exactly what we want to do. So therefore, developing a conservation strategy is one of the assignments in the update to the action plan. And it involves certainly having a sort of a longer interval fire frequency. So you got to, in some ways, you have to go and protect these landscapes from being burned, and also protect, if they do get on fire, they're going to burn at high severity. You got to protect the nearby communities. So there's some idea of protecting them. And of course, when it comes to these shrublands, we really want to limit the expansion of non-native plants in here, non-native grasses in particular. That's a really key indicator of shrubland health going forward. We have to figure out how we do that when they're invasive, and so they're getting around. There's also, again, a lot of damage has been done. We've seen state shifts from forest to shrublands. We've seen shrublands shift from shrublands to grasslands. And so we have to repair that damage going forward. And sort of the in review California reforestation strategy thinks there's like 2.3 million acres of need. And a lot of these are forests that have been burned at very high severity and need to be repaired. And again, if we do nothing, it's only going to get more going forward. We're at this really strategic point where we have to make this push. And so they have outlined a program where we can go and treat half of that area and restore these to healthy forests, so we ensure that we have forests still here. The same idea applies, again, to the chaparral restoration. How do we go into chaparral that's been burned too frequently, and how do we get that back into a healthy status? And again, this is trickier. We don't have as much experience with it, but Molinari and her colleagues showed a really good case study after the Sand Fire in Southern California, where when you think about it, you have this footprint and there's different intensities, different sort of responses, different landscapes. And maybe the place where we focus our restoration efforts should be in the areas with the lowest non-native grasses, because we know that's a real big barrier. And therefore now there's a strategy going forward. And we need to think about how we go and restore our shrublands as well as how we restore our forested areas. Again, so this is part of a plan. It's a 10-year plan, but it has a forward-looking sort of perspective in that we really need to ramp up now. We need to prioritize these high hazard areas in the next 10 years. We need to build pod networks and make other ways of scaling beneficial fire. And then we need to address this restoration backlog with the idea that going forward, it'll be more sustaining and maintaining over the next 10 years. So it won't be such a all hands on deck effort. It'll just be part of what we regularly do to manage a threat going forward. This doesn't happen just with sort of, by magic. We really have to engage all the different sort of levers we have available to us. One of the key ones is that not only do we need to support tribal stewardship, but we need to embrace that ethic where fire is part of the landscape, and it's something that we as a people living in a fire-prone landscape do. That's super important. We also have to expand the workforce. We don't have the capacity right now to get all this work done in the time. And at the same time, we want to make sure that these are not crappy jobs, that they are a career pathway for folks working in this area. The more we can expand wood capacity, the cheaper it's going to be. We're taking wood out of these landscapes. If we can find a profitable way to use those, not only do we add resources, but we reduce the cost of doing these. And of course, it's been it's a task force buzzword: align programs, and make sure you address the differences in ecosystems and land ownerships going forward. The last one, again, another task force buzzword, is achieve multiple mandates. If you look at the conclusion of the landscape resilience strategy, we call it a triple win, right? We're going to protect ourselves from wildfires, we're going to restore the health of our forests and landscapes, and we're going to bring economic benefit to rural communities. That is what we mean by achieving multiple mandates. It doesn't mean it doesn't come without costs, right? Trade-offs are a foundation of economics. There's a trade-offs, the foundation of ecology, and there are going to be costs. It's going to cost a lot of money. We're going to need to breathe a bit more smoke. We're going to need to treat in some sensitive areas. And we're going to need to continue to ask firefighters to endanger themselves to protect us. But if we can get this done, we're going to transition from, it's a hopeful strategy, it's an ambitious strategy, and we want to transition from sort of a reactive, crisis-driven approach to a proactive strategy of fire stewardship going forward. And I think if we can get this going, we have a lot of momentum to make this happen. So it's a realistic strategy, ambitious but realistic going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Tremendous overview. We now have Brian Kittler's here from American Forest. As John mentioned, American Forest and CAL FIRE partnered on a landmark study about a year ago that has really set the stage for the strategy. So talk us through what you came up with, Brian.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, John. I'm going to speak about this study that we did with CAL FIRE. And really what we were looking to do is to set out and forecast out into the future, several decades, what is climate change going to do to our forests? And what can we do in terms of forest resilience activities to reduce the degradation and loss of forests in California? And while it was really focused on carbon, we learned a lot along the way with regards to forest resilience and wildfire activity. So we know and we discovered that we are at a crossroads in California with our forests and with fire. If we don't change the course, we are on the path towards these compounding threats, leading to the potential for the loss of up to 48%, as modeled, 48% of California's forests, and a doubling of the amount of carbon that we emit from our forests through 2071. So the course of the next 45 years. That is not a path that we want to be on. And what are the strategies to get us off that path? So we looked at those different strategies and we found actually that if we implement a holistic suite of restoration tools, we can actually reduce the rate of loss down to 8%. And we can actually reduce annual forest sector emissions to just to under 14% of what we would be at with that rate of doubling. So specifically what we did is we utilized a holistic suite of models, ecosystem process models, carbon models, fire models, and economic models to really look at a future with climate change included as our baseline, and then look at a suite of forest management activities and wood product pathways to ask the questions about how can we manage our forests in a way that will reduce wildfire risk, reduce the severity of burning, reduce the amount of emissions that occur within our landscapes. And where we ended up is looking at a maximum natural climate solutions portfolio approach. So really that is anchored upon doing these fire resilience treatments that John talked about, thinning and prescribed fire, a combination thereof, getting to a place where we can become more reliant on beneficial fire to be the principal stewardship tool that we have. And then understanding that our forests are still going to burn, and they're going to burn at high severity a lot more often. So we need post-fire restoration and reforestation. And then likewise, the utilization of wood products is a critical climate smart forestry tool. So looking closer at the scale of activity and that 10-year window that John talked about, we found that given the trajectory that we're on and what we experienced from 2012 through 2015 with the drought and tree mortality, followed by the periods of severe fire, that really is the future that we're after. Right? Or the trajectory that we're on. So the 2030s, mid 2030s through 2040s, things could get really bad. So implementing these approaches at scale, resilience treatments, reforestation, and utilization of harvested wood, that can get us on a different path. And really scaling up, we need to ramp up treatments in this next 10 years, especially across all lands. And you recognize here the federal piece, a 3x ramp up there. With reforestation, it's paramount to act quickly. It gets more expensive the longer we wait, and we need to prioritize. We can't treat every acre, so we have to treat the acres smartly and intelligently, and prioritize those areas that are most important in this post-fire space in terms of community safety. So reducing the post-fire fuel load, returning an ecosystem that's better adapted to forest and fire, and places that provide ecosystem services, our watersheds, water delivery. And then lastly, wood utilization, a critical part of this strategy. So key takeaways from this work, this modeling work, this futuring, California forests are projected to lose carbon and forest area over the next 50 years. There's no single fix here. We need a combination of pre-fire resilience treatments, prescribed fire, beneficial fire back into the landscape, reforestation and utilizing wood products, restoring resilience before and after fire. If we move forward aggressively and intelligently, we can actually reduce the forecasted loss of forest by 83%. So we can make a difference here with these targeted and prescribed treatments. Revenue generation is going to be an important part of this. John talked about trade-offs. Trade-offs in treatment design and where we locate them, our ability to actually have forest markets, all of that is going to really matter here. We can actually bring down the total cost of doing this pulse of treatments, could offset it by 31 to 94%, depending on the configuration of markets. We will be generating a lot of wood with this plan. So enough wood to actually utilize double the current sawmill and biomass capacity for the entire state of California. So investing in markets, investing in infrastructure is going to be a critical piece. And then lastly, this is a choice. This is a choice between basically a managed transition towards a future where a forest can better accommodate fire, or a transition towards an unmanaged collapse of forest ecosystems in California. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Now we turn to Lenya. Lenya, I vividly remember it was only 5 or 6 years ago when you and a coalition of folks approached the task force, approached new CAL FIRE director, Joe Tyler, and said, you really ought to make beneficial fire a high priority. Seems amazing how far we've come since then. Talk to us about that, and yet we're not where we need to be. So give us a flavor where we are and what the plan has in store for us there.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So I wanted to start us off just grounding us in the 2022 strategic plan for expanding the use of beneficial fire. We put this plan out in March of that year, and it had some pretty bold and ambitious statements. So you see here in this quote that we said that by 2025, that California would have the policies, programs, capacity, and knowledge to effectively implement beneficial fire. Here we are in 2026. We know we didn't quite get there, but we did get pretty far. And I hope what I share with you today is not an acres-focused approach, not talking about treatments and showing maps, but really talking about people and talking about the role that people have had in this and where we've gotten to, and then where we're trying to head with this action plan and where I think the real potential is. So I want to take us to Humboldt County. That's where I am. That's where I've spent my career working on beneficial fire. And I think it's a place that exemplifies what needs to happen in this state. In Humboldt County, we have many, many tribes who are leading on cultural burning and revitalizing cultural practice, including the Karuk tribe, that is the first tribe in the state of California to have an agreement under SB 310 to manage, to have authority over permitting for cultural burning. We have one of the most active prescribed burn associations in the state, with 450 people who are actively engaging in prescribed fire implementation. We have the highest density of state certified burn bosses in the state. We have nonprofit organizations who are developing and leading their own prescribed fire programs. We have federal agencies who have active prescribed fire programs and programmatic NEPA. And we have a very supportive and active CAL FIRE unit. So I think what we see in Humboldt County, and these are photos from a recent Humboldt County Prescribed Burn Association burn, we're seeing that the art and the culture of fire is renewed in the place where we are. And we're using the claims fund. We're using the state certified burn boss program. We're using the executive order from last year. And we are adhering to all aspects of the action plan as it's developed now. So where do we go from here? I think the key thing that we really need to be focusing on is people and programs and not projects. We hear a lot, we talk a lot about how acres are not a good metric for this work. It's really true, and we really do need to move toward investments that invest in the people and programs that will lead on this. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that in the new action plan. We have 4 items in the action plan that are specifically focused on capacity building, on Indigenous stewardship, on training, on organizational capacity. These are the places that will make a difference. So I really want to lean into things like the Beneficial Fire Training Network, the Beneficial Fire Capacity Program. You'll see those in the action plan, and those are key areas supporting cultural burning, supporting the development of more SB 310 agreements for those federally recognized tribes that can take advantage of that. Those are the areas where we need to focus, and I think that we're going to do that. There are also 2 beneficial fire bills moving through the legislature right now that are tied directly to these items in the action plan. So Assembly Bill 1699, Assembly Bill 1891 directly address these things that we are prioritizing in the action plan. Now, I do think that there are some areas that need more emphasis, need more detail, things that we are all going to be working on a lot as we try to implement the action plan. One of them is the idea of really thinking forward to what do these treatments and, what do these ambitious goals look like on the ground and in the air? What is the air quality, is the structure of the air quality system set up to deal with that much more smoke that we're hoping to put out there? And how are we engaging with the public health community? I didn't see public health listed in the beneficial fire part of the action plan. We need to get them in there. I personally am really excited to work with the public health department and community to make this work happen. Also, for me, I think the elephant in the room really is the public land piece of this work in California, managed wildfire. How do we shift away from this, real emphasis on fire suppression, on getting better at suppressing fires when we know that that's kicking the can down the road? How do we really effectively bring beneficial fire into the way we're talking about and living with fire in California? So with that, I just want to say I'm excited about the action plan. The Fire Network is here to support the implementation of it, and people and programs, not projects, okay?
Thank you, Lenya. And let me say on to both of you, I think it's one of the hallmarks of the task force that we really do rely upon our external partners to help drive a big part of our strategies, gives us more buy-in, gives us more expertise. It really puts us on the cutting edge. So thank you both. And now I'm going to turn again to hear a little bit of a different perspective from Southern California. Jeff Hayes is here from the Forest Service to fill us in on what Southern California is up to.
All right, let me get to my
The order?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'll rewind. Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, everybody.
Department of Conservation.
Okay, thank you. So I'm here from the Department of Conservation. I think it's been really awesome to hear about some of the updates in the action plan and some of the things we've done before, especially the what and the why. The piece I wanted to flag that I'm really excited about, that I think this plan does, is a lot more of how, right? How are we actually going to do this? That's my favorite question. So I really get really excited to see it in here. And so when we talk about how we're going to achieve landscape resilience, our primary answer, not the only answer, but our primary answer in the action plan is through regional action, right? And this means strong regional partnerships with robust plans that come together into these integrated programs of work that Patrick talked about this morning, right? So this means that when we say strong partnerships, we're talking about the people Lenya just mentioned, right? Actual human beings with resources and knowledge and skills have to do this. And they need to be embedded and empowered by institutions and organizations, right? And that's that means public, private, community-based organizations, right? That are set up and organized in order to do this. So when we say partnerships, we're talking about groups, strong partnerships, groups with administrative and fiscal capacity, with project development and implementation capacity, the ability to take through the full life cycle of a project from the day a landowner shows up and says, here's what I think needs to happen, to the shovels in the ground, to monitoring, reporting, and follow through. It means alignment. So we have all these different organizations and all these different layers that we're going to hear a lot about how complex it can be. And that means that the partnerships need to have actual mechanisms. They have to have agreements. They have to have MOUs. Sometimes it's not formal, but you need those things together. And then you have to have the adaptive capacity to handle change as individual people leave, as organizations shift, as governments shift, and as there's fires on the landscape. We add those things to these robust plans that provide the layer for getting those folks organized and putting together a process that people can follow. When you have those things, we can go through that cycle Patrick talked about. So one place this looks like in Southern California, which you'll hear more about broadly. This is in San Bernardino, where we were last year. They've taken their plan and they have this plan that brings together geography based off of the actual jurisdictions and the needs of those places. This is state, federal, and local responsibility areas, but they have many more layers sort of stacked into this, right? Who's going to do what? Where are the needs? Then they have data, they have assessments, they look at those high hazard conditions, they look at their other needs, they look at where fires have been, and they put together that information they need. And then it turns into projects. You can't really see it that well on this map. This has 80 projects on it, more than $50 million of ready work. And those projects are in a pipeline of action. So there's things that they can do now. There's things that are going to be ready 1-2 years and in 5 years. And so we can invest in these to move action forward together. Right now, so RFFC, Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, as has been stated, we've invested more than $142 million in regions to build capacity and build these plans. We have a network of plans providing coverage or services for more than 97% of the fire-prone area of California. And they are making progress. So more than half of these plans are ready. They're ready now. They have all the elements that we ask for, and they're in use. About half are upcoming. Those are going to be ready in the next 18 months. By the end of 2027, we will have a network of plans that are covering almost every portion of the state. Now, what coverage means is complicated, and anybody who wants to find me after this, we can have a really robust conversation of that. But where that's going to let us go in the new action plan is this map on the right. So it's not that we're going to take the plans we have and transform them into these other ones, but this is a layer that we've created through the action plan to organize, prioritize, and report. So in the climate bond, RFFC has $185 million to continue investments in this full life cycle of regional priority plans by investing in partnerships with plans to then take these forward, mobilize them, and run that full life cycle of programs. There's also another $160 million for regional projects, and we have some really innovative, exciting partnerships with other state agencies and some private entities on how we can bring in other sources of funding to mobilize this work. So by 2027, we expect to be able to have a network of all hands, all lands, 5-year programs of work that includes Forest Service projects, that includes private projects, public projects, and that explanatory and operational layer for what is the actual mechanism these things are going to relate. Because not all of these regions are going to work the same way, but we should be able to show up to bring you guys into any one of these regions, say, here's how this region is organized to solve problems. They've taken serious approaches to answer those questions. We'll have data and science to back it up. So with that, that's what we're going for. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. So now, Jeff, show us how this is playing out in Southern California. And Jeff, by the way, I should say, he's really been the leader on the Forest Service side of thinking really hard about how do you integrate the Forest Service planning process with this new framework that Brian's been talking about.
All right. Thank you, Patrick and Task Force, for having me. And so I'm going to talk you through some of our regional strategies. But first of all, good news. In 2026, the Forest Service in Southern and Central California is on track to accomplish more hazardous fuels treated than ever before to reduce wildfire risk across the Angeles, Cleveland, Los Padres, and San Bernardino National Forests. Our regional strategies and partners have made treatments more effective across boundaries, and we know there are outcomes like never before. The new action plan would further advance these landscape level strategies to reduce risk for communities, infrastructure, and ecosystems. This accomplishment arose through both the dedication and productivity of our workforce and the steadfast support of our partners. Foremost among those partners is the National Forest Foundation, which contracted work to thin forests, maintain fuel breaks, reduce ignitions, and create defensible space around infrastructure, as well as support tribal initiatives. Our firefighters completed work to burn those materials, also with partners, and air quality regulation was less limiting than in the past, since the South Coast Air Quality Management District allowed us to burn for public safety benefit on no burn days for the first time this year. As you heard previously, the Southern California Ignition Reduction Program is fully underway, and NEPA compliance was completed for the first 3 pilot projects this spring, shown as ovals on the map, thanks to substantial support from Caltrans. Implementation will begin within weeks to make these roadways less ignitable across boundaries, including the use of BurnBot technology. Now the executive committee is guiding the selection of the next rounds of roadways for a 10-year plan, expanding the effort to the northwest, including the Central Coast, and building efficiencies to grow at scale among many partners, with RFFC projects shown as stars on this map. The Southern California Montane Forest Conservation Strategy is also fully underway with project prioritization and community engagement workshops across the region using new tools. Implementation is building across the Sky Islands, with North Big Bear as a prime example of forest management. Reforestation planning is complete for several large fires, Apple, El Dorado, and Bobcat, and implementation begins this year thanks to the support of Tree People. And our Good Neighbor Authority agreement with CAL FIRE also supports this work and more throughout Southern and Central California. The photo here shows the desired condition for these forests, a broadcast burn on Mount Laguna a few weeks ago. This map shows the Southern California pods, potential operational delineations across boundaries. Many of these control lines are fuel breaks already. How many should be must reflect firefighter access and maintenance limitations. With upcoming completion of this pod network, the strategic fuel break assessment that we published this winter and fire modeling I'll mention in a moment, we now have the information to identify a sustainable strategic fuel break network. Meanwhile, our increased treatments have the fuel breaks in far better condition than in the past, preparing us for the 2026 wildfire season. And we appreciate that the new action plan calls for a chaparral conservation strategy to synthesize the science and management needs for this globally significant ecosystem. Management of the invasive gold-spotted oak borer is another crucial priority, since it will spread as shown on this map if it is not systematically managed all the way through California. Tree People has stepped forward to lead a new GSOB coalition. Santa Barbara Fire Safe Council is planning for early detection and rapid response on the Central Coast, and many partners are treating oak trees for containment and removing dead oaks for wildfire risk reduction. The action plan would benefit from including a statewide oak woodland conservation strategy with tribal leadership to address this threat and more. Thanks to Jolene Tam of the La Jolla Tribe for both her leadership and these images that illustrate this landscape and community challenge. As Brian described, the RFFC partners are critical for addressing all of these boundary spanning challenges, coordinating among local partners and currently putting a CAL FIRE block grant to use across Southern California. This is the same area that he showed on one of his slides, and the 5-year plans of the Forest Service are being incorporated into each of these regional priority plans, and we look forward to their growth as laid out in the action plan. But the pace and scale could grow even more if large amounts of funding were provided directly to implementation partners with capacity, like National Forest Foundation and Tree People, to accomplish the highest priority work across boundaries. I'd like to finish by talking about values. These images show the outcomes of cross-boundary treatments in the Inland Empire. So on the left are the treatments that can reduce the wildfire risk from the top image that shows risk to the bottom image that shows the protection afforded by the treatments as quantified by Vibrant Planet. This week, we taught more than 24 partners to use their state-of-the-art fire modeling platform, carefully tailored to Southern and Central California ecosystems, to plan treatments for multiple benefits and articulate those benefits to garner more investment. Since everyone benefits from reduced wildfire risk, we hope that everyone will contribute to it as envisioned by the task force and action plan.
Thank you, Jeff. You know, by the way, it's really been impressive the way you, Michael O'Connell, and other Southern California leaders have really brought everybody together. There's an existing forum that meets quite often to make sure everybody's aligned. But tell us where the utilities fit in. It seems like trying to get a handle on their work combined with yours is pretty vital to get a proper perspective on the whole picture in Southern California.
Yeah, it's absolutely vital. I'm glad to see the utilities here today. And in fact, I'll credit Jackie for her leadership. So in January, we held a meeting with all of the forest supervisors in California with the utilities to talk about how we better align our efforts. So that was definitely a leadership setting moment for us. But meanwhile, we've been involved in the Utility Fuels Management Working Group of the task force, which has brought under the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, the parties together to talk about how we better align our efforts. I can give you a few examples of that. So for SDG&E, we're part of a Wildfire Safety Advisory Committee, and we meet regularly to talk about how we work together to reduce risk. With SCE, we'll be having a summit next week with the 4 Southern California forests to talk about the best ways to align our efforts. And with PG&E, they supported a project for wildfire risk reduction along the Central Coast that we're now close to implementation on, should have a decision to implement soon. So there's all sorts of opportunities for utility engagement in this work.
And just a quick follow-up question. Do you have visibility on each other's maps at this point in terms of understanding where their treatments are, their understanding where your treatments are?
We do, and I would identify that I think that's the piece that still needs to be put together broadly for all of us, right? We have the treatment tracker to look at treatments across the state, but the planning efforts, it's very difficult to put them all in the same place. We've been working on that. We've learned a lot going through that process, and we're getting there. But yes, we have them on a map. The maps you have to find in different places. And so that's just the nature of the business right now.
Just to add to that, we've had some spirited conversations with both of these guys the last 2 weeks on that point. We have now, for the first time, a comprehensive list of all planned projects in Southern California. It's really, really impressive as we're trying to transition from just keeping track of completed process to get an inventory of planned projects. It's hard, because people don't always know exactly where these projects are going to be, what acres are going to be, whether they're going to have the funding. And so we've really got to work hard to come up with a template that everybody can use. So we've got good information, and also recognize that the size and scope of these projects changes over time because we hear from them. But I just want to thank you guys. I think that'll be the next big leap, is to have for each of these sub-regions a comprehensive list of all of the projects so that we can see how they work together. We can model their results. We can report on them. So thank you again for leading the way on that in Southern California.
And just a quick, one quick follow-up on that. You know, we have a duty to Californians to optimize our investments. The fact is, we are in a resource-constrained environment, and if we have more projects and more work than we have resources. The single biggest driver of utility rate increases is these wildfire mitigation project spending. So if we are not optimizing ratepayer investments, if we are not optimizing taxpayer investments, we are not succeeding. So I can appreciate complexity, organizational complexity, technical complexity, and I appreciate the progress that we're making, but this needs to be an area of intense focus, because simply put, to get the work that we need to at the scale we need to optimize our collective investments.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Amanda Watson from Amador RCD. We hear a lot of speakers from large, well-funded organizations. We thought it'd be important to hear from one of our smaller groups in Northern California, how you're making sense of all these changes that are underway.
Yeah, thank you for having me here today. I understand that a lot of you are familiar with what resource conservation districts are, so I'll keep that part brief, but I will encourage you to come find me after the panel. Local government's one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I'd love to deep dive with anybody interested in how we're utilizing our local government to make these changes. RCDs are special districts of local government focused on natural resource priorities formed out of the Dust Bowl. We work on the programs and issues that our communities needs. Those can span from forestry, agriculture, water, soil health, and wildfire resiliency. But what really distinguishes, in my opinion, RCDs are that we are locally driven and non-regulatory. We work directly with landowners and communities as partners, helping them to access resources, plan projects, and implement solutions on the ground. In Central Sierra, where I work, RCDs are deeply engaged in local and regional planning and implementation, particularly around wildfire resiliency and forest health. Amador RCD is, supposed to move that slide earlier. Resource conservation districts, there's actually 98 of them across the state of California, and resource conservation districts also span across the entire United States as well. So in the Central Sierra, the Amador Resource Conservation District is part of a broader network that includes the Central Sierra RCD Hub, along with sub-regional collaborations such as the Amador Alpine Calaveras Tuolumne Natural Resource Hub, which we call the ACT Hub. Through these partnerships, we participate in countywide and multi-county planning efforts, including community wildfire protection plans and broader regional strategies. Our natural working lands hubs are working to bring together diverse partners to coordinate planning, implement on-the-ground projects, and provide technical assistance to landowners. Right now, we're conducting a regional needs assessment and the beginning of a landscape scale assessment through a climate-smart Department of Conservation funding. The goal is to develop a natural working lands resiliency strategy that moves us towards an all-lands approach, connecting croplands, rangelands, forest lands across ownership boundaries. To support this work, RCDs in the Central Sierra are building a collaborative model that balances regional coordination and local autonomy. We share staff expertise, coordinate training, jointly develop programs, and identify regional priorities while still allowing each district to respond to its community-specific needs. One example of this is the Healthy Soil Block Grant, which is a $4 million grant that the Placer Resource Conservation District led, and RCDs across the region provided technical assistance to agricultural producers. This kind of coordination allows us to deliver at scale while staying grounded locally. Another example is the long-running Crisis to Opportunity program addressing tree mortality, which is administered through the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. This over $10 million project has helped RCDs work closely with the Natural Resource Conservation Service by hiring and training affiliate staff that work within the federal system. These staff help expand the limited capacity of our federal partners in our rural regions to provide capacity to support land managers to get access to federal funding through EQIP or RCP direct funding. A key strength of this model is shared expertise. Across our region, we have access to specialized staff, foresters, archaeologists, pesticide control advisors, and others who can support multiple districts. This means no single RCD has to do everything alone, but we can do much more together. At the heart of our work is a commitment to listening. Across the region, we are working to better understand the needs of our communities, what barriers our land managers face when trying to integrate these projects, where technical assistance is falling short, and how we can improve our outreach and training. Because effective technical assistance isn't just about what we deliver, but it's about how we deliver it and whether it actually meets people where they're at. In the AACT region, we've partnered with Rancher to Rancher to pilot a series of workshops that focuses on peer-to-peer learning. These field days take place out on working lands, in ranches, on forested properties, where land managers come together to talk openly about their challenges, their goals, their experiences. These are not top-down trainings, they are conversations. Participants walk the land together, observe what's happening on the ground, and share what they've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked. From there, they identify opportunities to test new practices in what we call safe-to-fail spaces, areas where experimentation is possible without high risk. These workshops are supported by hands-on activities, soil demonstrations, but the real value is the relationships that are built. Land managers leave with stronger networks, deeper understanding, and a clear pathway to resources that can support their goals. Coming back to shared staff and shared training, this is a critical part of our work. Our regional coordinator has partnered with University Cooperative Extension to develop targeted grazing short courses for RCD staff. This came directly out of a regional skills assessment that identified grazing support as a key gap. That's what regional coordination makes possible. We can identify shared needs and then build tailored solutions to address them. We're also working towards more unified technical assistance across our AACT hub. Each RCD will still have the important flexibility and to make things work locally, but we're building a shared foundation of how we can conduct site visits, track data, and deliver services. This ensures consistency, improve outcomes, and strengthens our collective impact. I want to come back to the idea of safe to fail, because I think it has broader implications. Of course, our goal is to create landscapes and communities that are safe from catastrophic fire. But if we want to get there, we also need to create conditions where innovation is possible. Right now, many landowners, communities, organizations, and partners operate with very little margin for risk. When working project to project or dollar to dollar, it's hard to try something new. If we want different outcomes, we need to create enough stability and support for people to step outside of their established practices, to experiment, to adapt, and learn. That means listening deeply, building trust, and investing in networks that support this work and the people and organizations that get it done. RCDs play a critical role in bridging the gaps between local and state priorities. A large goal of our regional planning is to identify our needs and elevate those needs to the state level so that programs and policies can better reflect what's actually happening on the ground, especially in our rural communities. Across the Central Sierra, RCDs are implementing forest health and fuels reduction projects across land ownerships. We participate in regional planning efforts and implement cross-boundary projects like strategic fuel breaks. The state's state's landscape resiliency action plan provides a strong framework. It recognizes the importance of moving beyond acres treated as a sole metric, emphasizes technical assistance, and supports cross-boundary landscape scale work. It also highlights the value of nature-based solutions, tribal engagement, and streamlining permitting to reduce barriers. These are all critical steps forward. At the same time, the success of the plan will depend on how it's implemented. Our regions are complex, with long-standing partnerships and diverse needs. That complexity needs to be seen as a strength. As we move forward, it's essential that we maintain flexibility, avoid one-size-fits-all approaches, and align with existing local networks. And we need to think about metrics that go beyond acres, as we talked about, but even beyond risk reduction. We need to ask, how strong are our communities? How well are we sharing information? How are we building inclusive plans, implementing projects, and responding and recovering from fire? Because we can treat thousands and thousands of acres, but if we don't invest in the people and organizations doing that work, we can't achieve lasting resilience. At the end of the day, resilience isn't just about landscape. It's about people. It's about relationships, about trust, and about local capacity that makes work possible. If we support those systems, if we invest in the networks already doing the work, we'll be far better positioned to meet the challenges ahead.
All right, thank you, Amanda. We're back to the executive committee. Wade, we got a few minutes for questions and short dialogue.
Yeah, thanks. I recognize that there is a lot of money flowing through the system right now with Proposition 4, the climate bond funding. Patrick showed the slide of just how much funding is either available or being made available. Given that this is a draft program and treat the worst first is a key principle, but that we haven't finalized the program, question occurred to me that, given the resource constrained environment that we find ourselves in at the federal and state level, and certainly at the utility level as well, are we thinking about modifying, funding that's getting out the door this year and next, to really prioritize these areas under that principle? Or is this a situation where the timing doesn't line up?
Brian can help answer that question. All three of the major funding organizations are either writing their guidelines now or finishing them, right? And my sense is they address this question head on, right? In terms of making sure that both the projects that are approved and regional plans hit the high priority areas that we're talking about.
I think that's true in terms of making sure that we're meeting those high priorities are reflected in the guidelines. We meet with CAL FIRE, the conservancies, and a few other folks who are putting out grant guidelines routinely to make sure that we're also saying similar things. So I do think there are opportunities to make sure that we are reinforcing that where we set priorities and where we're setting good targets, that those are reflective of the action plan goals. The other piece I'll put out where I see an opportunity here is that we've seen how powerful it is for our grantees when we set performance-based measures and outcomes-based measures, right? And we say, you need to hit a target, not say, do this in a prescriptive way, A, B, C, D. So I think writing guidelines, something we've tried to do is write the guidelines where say, here are your broad objectives. Here are some standards that you can't miss. But then you're empowered and accountable for telling us how you're going to meet those goals. So within our guidelines, one thing we do is we're proposing to give block grants that require adaptive management of which projects you put forward based off of where those projects are at in the pipeline. So within our guidelines, we wouldn't even have to change it, even if the action plan changes in a few months, because grantees are supposed to it's a dynamic process where they're allowed to put forward the project that's most ready in that moment to accomplish the objective. So I think we've seen good successes with that.
That's helpful, but just to put a fine point on it, again, optimize keyword, for the remainder of my tenure, again, because we're in a constrained environment. So if science demonstrates that there are certain areas that we should treat because they have a higher effective risk reduction, then let's make sure if there's not money that's gone out already, that we prioritize that, and let's catch up in real time with our grant guidelines. Totally appreciate, your point about outcomes focused versus prescriptive, but I think we just let's get this plan done. Let's continue to invest in capacity, and I'm totally with you, Lania, on people and programs. But we also, if we're going to move beyond just acres treated, we still want accountable, measurable results, because that's ultimately what I think our residents demand of us.
If I can add something in, just as a call out, and I know we're short on time. One of the areas I was leaning over chatting with Wade a little bit, a really big topic area for us is on the reforestation side. We're feeling a lot of tension right now. As Wade and I were just discussing, for the agency, it's a high priority. We've been called out that we have a lot more work to do in California than we have. I think Wade and I have both than we have been doing. I think we've both heard that. The tension I'm feeling, though, is again the magnitude of what we have in front of us and what we need to do, and then some variance in how folks feel about the scope and scale of how we do restoration. I met with just a group yesterday, and I heard pretty loud and clear they really want us to be very place-based and come up with like a plan that really fits for that area. And I told Wade, I said, I feel the tension of I got a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do, and for the level we need it, I don't know if I have that luxury to be able to design, reforestation piece by piece. And so just for the task force, I think that is some future work to help us think through that. It's important when we talk about, all the things that make a difference or gain from having reforestation. It's important to all of us. And I just think it's a real tension point right now.
Can I ask just a quick question? I think building on the guidelines conversation to Brian, I think, with this 10-year plan really emphasizing a shift toward maintenance, I'm curious sort of how the conversations have been given around what it looks like to sustainably finance the scale of the landscape treatments that are necessary, thinking kind of beyond the climate bond funding cycle, and if there's sort of maybe mechanisms within the regional plans that could be a requirement around building some sort of longer term finance to rely less on the grant funding, but sort of put in place as a part of a requirement for the plans. Or I'm curious what thought has been given to that.
So if I'm understanding the question is as part of planning capacity building, are we working with and ensuring that regional partnerships are not just relying on state funding and are also looking sort of broader and also deeper in terms of long term. So we do have requirements in our guidelines, and we do work with our grantees to ensure that part of what they have to do is look for alternative sources of funding, to look for cost sharing opportunities, and look for sustaining pathways of funding. We see this play out in a few different ways. There's some regions where every entity that's sort of getting capacity building funding also has some technical assistance, but also a requirement for figuring out a fiscal strategy. What I have seen is that this is a huge challenge, and that we have 30 plus years of sort of scarcity mindset and organizations and institutions that have been built around the knowledge that if they don't get the next grant, they will fail next year, right? And one challenge we have is even getting folks to say, we have to really pressure them to say, you need to be ambitious, and there is actual possibility, and there's a lot of fear there too, right? Because we haven't always followed up. So we see some really exciting things coming in with the level of what we're able to say with outcomes reporting now. I think the interest from utilities that we have some really innovative, interesting pilots that we're hoping to start in terms of working on like long-term maintenance agreements for some of these landscape scale treatments. So we've seen some really cool progress there, and on the financing piece with forest forest resilience bonds and pieces like that. But I think it's an unsolved problem, right? Like we can say you need to find another source of funding in 10 years. But if that funding doesn't exist, then I'm not sure what they're going to do.
Yeah, I just think to that point, I think that there's a real opportunity with this task force. There's been so many great examples through different resource, we saw the examples from Napa, we see a lot of really cool examples. And so I just would encourage us to continue to make sure that those resources, case studies, things are flowing throughout the regions in California to not have to replicate, sort of the lessons learned and trial by fire, but really thinking about how, how we can use the resources that are already there to not duplicate and help support kind of lower resource regions and thinking about the finance models. So.
If I could I mention one from our region, the El Dorado and Georgetown Resource Conservation District, and through this idea of really being able to pilot programs and have that space to come up with solutions. They have a strong, durable partnership with CAL FIRE, and though CAL FIRE now has a lot of human resources with their crews available, they pilot a project where the Resource Conservation District make sure all of the environmental compliance is complete, and actually coordinates the project management of where those crews go when those crews are available. So there's not a downtime of where's this project? Okay, how can we get there? There's actually that mechanism set up with the Resource Conservation District. We're now trying in RRCD to get funding to do the same and to expand that across the Amador El Dorado unit. So I think that just speaks to when you have those durable relationships, those conversations, you can pick up the phone and have those conversations and connect those dots of, we have too much, what do you need, how do we make it work? So I think that's a really strong piece of piloting those types of projects.
Yeah, and I'll just share that I think one promising aspect of this strategy is its vision around the scale up and then the sustaining and maintaining. So if we're able to tell our policymakers that, and our appropriators, in the state and the federal government, that we have our arms around this issue, we surged up activity to try to limit catastrophic wildfire. And now, based on science, we understand where we need to treat, the relative effectiveness, and then how we need to move into sort of sustaining and maintaining mode. While the funding isn't available today to achieve this, I think it's really important that we have the roadmap. And we can say with confidence, if these investments get made across the federal, state, utility, but also private sector investments as we build up those markets, we can ultimately reach a point where we're sustaining and maintaining risk.
Well, and we're suggesting that we can get there through a regionally based approach. And that's been really powerful, really supportive. But it depends, as you said earlier, on demonstrating that. By having these regional plans that have all the projects in them and having model results. Otherwise, inevitably, we're going to get calls for a top-down approach. The state needs to come in, identify the priority areas, and get them done. So we're banking on a regional approach, but that depends on strong criteria and real accountability from those regions. And so that's got to be our focus for the next year or two.
Yeah, and I think in the break, I was talking to Michael and Joe, and to me, the success looks like when counties or regions are taking ownership, that, the state's not going to solve the problem, the state's a partner, but given the unique nature of the challenge across into different areas of the state, it's really going to be about the regional leaders, the county leaders, the local leaders taking that power and accountability. And Brian, I get the point. I mean, we've made a lot of investments. We've got more funding to invest in that capacity, and it comes with accountability. And I think we've got the message loud and clear that it's not a one size fits all. These solutions are found on the ground, but it's as we build capacity, it's the regions and the counties having these plans on the landscape and within communities that they're going to execute. Thank you. Well, thanks, panel. Bobby.
Yeah, thank you. I had a couple comments. It's been a really great discussion, so I appreciate the opportunity to kind of listen in a little bit. But I did want to kind of highlight a couple comments that were made. First, Brian, you mentioned scarcity, and I think that's a reality. We've talked a little bit about this, particularly in areas where maybe perhaps a little economically depressed. What we find is that scarcity actually creates silos. And so I think we have to recognize that. It helps us have some difficult conversations. I also want to call out John and Jeff. You guys made some comments in regards to invasives and pests. Really appreciate that. Dawn and I were actually talking about that during the break and the role they have in fire. And then lastly, I had a question in regards to biomass for Brian Kittler, and I was curious if that was a component in your study. So when we talk about biomass utilization, oftentimes we're thinking about biomass plants, right? Converting it into energy. One of the trade-offs there, though, is that the cost of power is higher. And so does your study touch on that? And I would be curious to know, or any comments from the rest of the panel. Like, we really need to be able to draw the nexus between lowering the cost of treatments, lowering the cost of PG&E's treatments, and that higher cost of power, right? So please, if you may.
Yeah, we really looked at new markets, biochar, biofuels, mass timber. Certainly the traditional markets, the existing biopower infrastructure is, at play here. We did not necessarily get into sort of the pricing and energy markets, electricity markets as part of our study.
And that's a topic that we're going to continue to unpack in coming months, both through this interagency task force, and we're going to hopefully, build a public dialogue. And a lot of the, we've got a working group on the task force that's focused on this. So more to come on that.